My name is Hillel, and joining me is Rick Piper, and we're going to talk about Genesis. I'm a Jew, he's a Christian. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'haaretz. Let's just take this word by word real quick. Bereshit does not mean in the beginning. That's the first thing that I wanted to cover last week. There are several possible meanings of the word. If you want to say in the beginning, you would say Bereshonah. Both of them share the same root, Rosh, which means like head or right or beginning. But Reshit and Rosh Hashanah are two different words. We're probably not dealing with things in a chronological order here, where he creates light and he says evening and morning one day.
Underneath the verse 1, it says when God began to create. So could, as an English translation of that, could that be referring to a sort of in the beginning?
That translation, when God began, is probably sounds like it's going according to Rashi's translation of it. Every translation is a commentary, and every translation is the opinion of the translator. Whatever language it was originally written in, you're getting the opinion of someone else.
Yeah, that probably goes for any book, whether it's Torah, Bible, sci-fi novel.
Just keep in mind that translation is the opinion of someone else about what the text means. The next word, bara, is in Genesis 1:1 actually means to create from nothing. Yeah. Then when God created from nothing, he created two things, the heaven and the earth, whatever those are, and everything, and that was just the potential of the universe, effectively, two types of potential of the universe. Elohim is the name for God that is used throughout chapter 1. The yud and the mem at the end of the word Elohim it can mean plurality. Yud mem at the end of, like, for example, anashim. Anashim means like men. Nashim is women. So those are plurals. But we also find out that with this word Elohim, that it also can refer to an individual. And we saw this with Moses in Exodus 7:1.
Yeah, you were
It
saying,
says, you will be an Elohim Kaparo.
Yeah, you were saying last week the difference between Elohim and Elohim and the relation, I remember.
Elohim, basically I say Elohim because we're supposed to be very careful about how we say God's name. So I changed the H into a K sound. But it's the same word. So anyway, so Elohim here, how do we know when Elohim is being used as a singular or a plural? Well, we look at it as verb. If the verb is plural, then Elohim is used as a plural. If it's singular, then it's used as a singular. The verb here, bara, it means he created. It's a past tense singular. So that tells us that Elohim here is being used as a singular as well.
Just for all of us non-Hebrew reading people, which of these words, I guess, would be bara?
Second word from the right, yep. And so the default number in Hebrew is singular, and the default tense is past tense. And so here he created bara. In the beginning, or in the beginning of, or when God began creating, he created the heavens and the earth. And if you look at the fourth word there, you have an aleph and a tav, and that means et. Et, I don't know how much you guys understand about grammar. I'm sorry, this is a little grammar heavy today. We have direct objects in sentences. So, for example, Tom kicked the ball. Tom is the subject, kick is the verb, and ball is direct object, because the direct object is what the verb's action is the subject of the verb's action. So here the et in Hebrew oftentimes tells us what the direct objects are of the sentence. So the thing that is created here is et hashamayim ve'haaretz. God created the heavens and he created the earth. And we know that because you have the et there. Let's go on to verse 2, and I'm having to read it from my book. I can't see it on the screen. I'm going to read it from my book. Ve'haaretz chaita tohu v'bohu v'choshech al pnei tachum v'ruach Elokim berefet al pnei ha'mayim. So there it says, and the earth was astonishingly empty, some say tohu v'bohu, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God, or the wind of God, depending on how you translate it. And this whole verse here is also interesting. It says, and the earth was tohu and bohu. So the Ramban understands from this tohu and bohu. What is tohu and bohu? Tohu means potential. Earth was in a potential state, and bohu, it was in a potential state, bohu, and then it went to an actual state, tohu, which describes the process of actually God making everything. So the Ramban wants to tell us that here it's talking about what we're about to get into. He says, and Hoshek, darkness is upon the face of the deep. Here, Hoshek is understood as, we usually understand as darkness. And in the next verse 3, I believe, where we have the separation of light and dark, it means darkness, just darkness. But here, it makes the argument that this is actually an invisible fire. That's why they use the term darkness here. I got into that learning for a little bit. Yeah, it's like there's fire that exists that doesn't, I guess, that doesn't have any impurities. I think the light is created by impurities. And so the idea here was there were no impurities burn off, and therefore the fire didn't give off any light, and so it was invisible. So what the Ramban ultimately wants to do here is he wants to say that the 4 elements of creation exist here: fire, earth, wind, and water. Hoshek is the fire. The deep tohum is a mixture of earth and water. And we see this in different places like the Psalms and different areas where we use the word tohum, and then we find out that we're talking about, for example, when the sea is split, they walk across with what was the tohu, which is the sort of a mixture. It's a deep water, but ultimately it's mixed in with like earth and stuff. So so upon the face of the deep, tohum is the deep, but it's also earth and water. And the ruach is the wind upon the face of the water, right? So tohum represents sort of like earth, and you have spirit. You have you have wind, you have darkness, and then you have water, and those are the 4 elements. This is very popular amongst at this time because around this time, a little earlier, the Muslims had rediscovered the writings of Aristotle and the Greek thinkers, and so it was all the rage. Not to say that this stuff doesn't exist independent of that, but that there was really a desire, I think, in some ways to connect it with the 4 elements.
Or what were considered just the 4 elements. Now we have
Right.
a umpteen number of elements.
Well, I think better than elements, the 4 essences, like 4 forces. Even I've seen people with modern interpretations talk about the 4 forces or the 4, primal forces of nature or whatever. The point here is that here we have another very deep passage that we could get into and go into for quite a while, but we won't do that because I want to see if we can move on just a little bit further. Okay, and so this is the 3rd verse. Vayomer Elokim Yehi Or V'Yehi Or. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. So Vayomer is, and he said. Now this is going to be interesting. If you look down to the left, the second to last word also has that letter. That's a vav. Letter vav.
Okay.
Letter vav oftentimes means and. It also has another function. If you take that vav off, and you start with the next letter to it, the yud, that makes this word future tense. I mean, he will say, right? So putting that vav is called a vav conversive, and what that means is that it takes a future tense word and makes it past tense.
Okay.
Right? I point this out because if you look down to the second to last word, vahi, vahi, if you didn't have vahi, that vav on there, then you'd just be repeating the previous word, the 3rd word, yehi, the same word.
Yeah.
So God says, "Let there be light." This is future tense. And then it says, "Let there be light." And then it goes, "There was light." Past tense is done. They move from future to past tense. And the thing that makes it past tense is just that vav. Otherwise, it's the same word. Here's a problem. There's a problem in the verse, and that is it says, in order for you to speak, you have to have a mouth. You have to have a voice. But God, this is the Jewish understanding of God, is that God has no physical form whatsoever.
Yeah.
He doesn't have a body. Every time you come across the use of a body part or anthropomorphisms in the text, know that it's meant to be like allegorical. It's meant because human beings understand what you're trying to say here. If I said and God fliggle flagged, right, you wouldn't know what the heck fliggle flagged means, right?
Yeah.
So what we want to know is what's going on. So we have two problems here. The first problem is that God is speaking, and as far as we know, God doesn't speak. The second question is who's he speaking to? No, I mean, you don't speak to yourself. You don't invite America to yourself. Like if you
I
read,
talk to myself.
well, okay, that's true. I admit that there are some people who do talk to themselves. Sometimes they're borderline crazy. I put that out there. I'm not saying you're borderline crazy, but I'm not saying you're not either.
Well, I can admit I'm a borderline crazy.
In the Hebrew text, when you say Vayomer, usually you're speaking to someone else. Well, since we know that the act of God speaking is not meant to be literal anyway, God desired something. He desired there for the light to be, and through God's desire, the light came to be. Is sort of the way that this is interpreted. As well as the same things actually, but we see this in other places, like in 1 Samuel 20 verse 4,
Yeah.
where it says, "Whatever your soul says, I shall do for you." And the word "says" there actually understood not as actually speaking, but what you desire. In Genesis 24:51, and similarly, and let her be a wife for your master's son, as Hashem has spoken. If you go back and you look in the text, God never spoke, never said that sort of thing. He never said, "Let this woman be a wife." It means that God desired a wife for him. Where when you use the word "saying," you're talking about more like you're talking about internally in your heart. You're saying it to yourself. She who says in her heart, "Only I and none but me." So, for example, if you're thinking, really like you're thinking in your head.
Yeah.
Don't say it out loud, but you're thinking. Just like Hannah when she goes to pray, right? She's speaking to herself. She's just praying quietly while her lips are moving. Right? So
Yeah.
she's speaking out her desires in her heart. So both problems are solved by that, by understanding that Vayomer doesn't necessarily mean literally always. And this is an important point because we're talking about Peshat. Peshat doesn't mean I'm going to translate the word and that is the meaning of that. That didn't tell us what the text means. It means what information was the author trying to communicate. The author was not trying to say God speaks like a human. It was just indicating that God wanted the light to come into existence. Verse 4, Vayer Elohim et Haor ki tov. God saw that the light was good. We have this phrase ki tov. It comes up other places. It doesn't appear on the second day. It appears twice, I believe, on the sixth day. Ki tov is a God saying, is according to the Ramban, when God says, and it's good, he's established it permanently. It's a permanent establishment of it. Prior to that, if you notice when God created the heavens and the earth, he didn't say, it's good. He hasn't said that yet because everything was still in a state of potential. So he didn't establish it in that form forever. He was still using it to start making things. So now he's formed. So one other thing I want to go back to is the phrase "let there be" is a word for making something. It seems here to be you could say it's creating through separating, creating through by making things distinct. So God, God says later on that God separated between the light and the darkness. He called the darkness night and called the light day. Here we're going to get into in the next verses. How do we have a concept of time when there's no sun and moon and stars?
I can see God actually speaking, at the same time, as well as the inner desire. Because he might not have a mouth like us, but doesn't mean he can't necessarily speak somehow. He's God, right? Nothing's impossible for him.
We know from the burning bush and we know from later on that God can create a voice. God can communicate for sure. And all it means when God is saying things, it just means he's communicating. And here there's nobody to communicate with, so that we're just being let in on what was happening in the creation process, where God is bringing things into existence by, you say his words, but you can also say by his desire. It was his desire that created everything.